In my hometown, there's an old saying that everyone grows up hearing but no one really believes until it's too late, and that saying is simple: never take the road home after midnight if the fog comes in low and quiet, because the road will not take you where you think it does. I grew up hearing it from my grandmother, who would lower her voice whenever she mentioned it, as if the road itself might be listening, and she told me it wasn't on any map, didn't have a name, and didn't exist during the day, but everyone who'd lived there long enough knew exactly which stretch she meant. It looked like an ordinary back road that branched off the highway just past the old mile marker, the one with the rusted numbers and bullet holes in it, but if you drove past it during daylight, you'd swear there was nothing there at all, just trees, brush, and a shallow ditch where rainwater pooled. At night, though, especially after midnight, when the fog rolled in thick enough to blur the world into shapes and shadows, the road would be there, clean and smooth, stretching forward like it had always existed, patiently waiting for someone who didn't know better. The first time I heard a real story about it, I was 13, sitting on the back porch with my cousin Eli while the cicadas screamed in the trees and the air smelled like wet dirt and wood smoke. Eli told me about a man from the next town over who'd missed his turn one night and ended up driving for hours, even though the road should have taken him home in 15 minutes. He said the man's phone lost signal, the radio started picking up voices instead of music, and when he finally found his way back to the highway, the sun was rising, but it wasn't the same day anymore. 3 days had passed, and his car was coated in mud like it had been driven through fields instead of asphalt. People laughed it off, said he was drunk or confused, but Eli leaned closer and said something about the man that no one ever mentioned out loud. When he came back, he refused to drive at night ever again, and he sold his car within a week, because he swore something had followed him home and learned how to wait. I didn't think about the road much after that, at least not seriously, until years later when I moved back home after college. My grandmother had passed by then, the house felt emptier without her, and the town itself seemed quieter, like it was holding its breath. One night, after staying late with friends, I found myself driving home just after midnight, the road empty, the sky moonless, and the fog rolling in exactly the way my grandmother used to warn about, low, thick, and silent. I remember seeing the mile marker through the fog, the numbers barely visible, and I remember thinking, briefly, of the stories, but I was tired, sober, and convinced that folklore was just another word for boredom filling in the gaps. When my GPS glitched and rerouted me, telling me to take the next right, I didn't hesitate. The turn felt natural, familiar even, and the moment my tires left the highway, the world seemed to change in a way I can't fully explain, like the air itself had thickened. The road ahead was narrow but well maintained, lined with trees that leaned inward just enough to form a loose tunnel overhead, their branches swaying even though there was no wind. My headlights didn't seem to reach as far as they should have, the fog swallowing the light after only a few yards, and the silence pressed in so tightly that I could hear my own breathing over the engine. After a few minutes, I realized something was wrong, not in a dramatic way, but in the subtle, creeping sense that the drive was lasting too long. I should have passed the old barn by then the creek, then the broken fence, but none of it appeared. The road just kept going, curving gently, endlessly familiar and completely wrong. That was when I noticed the houses. At first, they were just shapes in the fog, old farmhouses set back from the road, dark windows, sagging porches, but as I drove, I realized they were all the same house, repeated over and over like a copy that had been redrawn from memory. Each one had a single porch light on, glowing dim and yellow, and each one had someone standing on the porch, motionless, facing the road. I couldn't see their faces, only their silhouettes, but every single one of them stood the same way, hands at their sides, heads tilted slightly as if listening. I told myself they were just people out late, or tricks of the fog, until one of them moved, not much, just enough to lift an arm and point down the road, guiding me forward like they knew exactly where I was going. My phone buzzed then, nearly making me drop it, and I felt a brief surge of relief when I saw I had service again. But the relief didn't last. The notification wasn't a call or a text, it was a map update, rerouting me again, showing a straight line forward with no turns, no landmarks, and no destination. The road wasn't named. It was just a blank stretch of gray leading deeper into nothing. That's when the radio crackled to life, even though I hadn't turned it on, and a voice began speaking softly, too distorted to understand at first, repeating the same phrase over and over until the words finally sharpened into something clear: "You're almost home." I don't know how long I drove after that. Time felt slippery, unreliable, like it was folding in on itself. The houses eventually stopped, replaced by open fields where the fog hung low over the ground, moving in slow, deliberate waves. In the distance, I could see figures standing in the fields, scattered and still, all facing the road, all watching as I passed. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I just kept driving, heart pounding, telling myself that panic was exactly what the road wanted, that if I stayed calm, I'd make it through. That's when I saw my grandmother's house. It was impossible. Her house had been sold after she died, repainted, remodeled, changed in a dozen small ways, but the one in front of me was exactly as I remembered it from childhood, down to the chipped steps and the crooked wind chime by the door. The porch light was on. The front door was open. And standing in the doorway was my grandmother, looking exactly as she had the last time I saw her alive. She smiled when she saw me, the same tired, gentle smile, and raised a hand in a small wave, like she'd been waiting. My foot hovered over the brake, every instinct screaming at me to stop, to go to her, to step into something familiar and safe, but beneath that pull was something colder, sharper, the memory of her voice telling me never to trust what the road gives back. I drove past. The moment I did, the house vanished like it had never been there, the fog closing in so tightly that for a second I couldn't see anything at all. The radio screamed with static, the engine sputtered, and the road finally ended, not in a driveway or a crossroads, but in a dead stop, a wall of trees so dense and dark they looked solid. I slammed on the brakes, chest heaving, hands shaking, and sat there in the silence, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, the fog began to thin, just enough for me to see the highway behind me, the mile marker standing where it always had, rusted and familiar. When I turned around, the road was gone. There was no turn, no sign it had ever existed, just a ditch and a line of trees. I made it home that night, but the road didn't let go of me as easily as I hoped. For weeks afterward, I dreamed of driving through fog, of houses repeating endlessly, of voices telling me I was almost home. Sometimes I'd wake up to find my phone open beside me, maps running, a blank road stretching forward with no end. And every now and then, when I drive late at night and the fog rolls in low and quiet, my GPS will hesitate, just for a moment, like it's considering something else, something it remembers. When that happens, I don't wait to see what it suggests. I pull over, I turn around, and I wait for the fog to lift, because I know now what my grandmother always did. The road is patient and it will always be there, but only if you're foolish enough to look for it again.